welcome everyone. This is part of our Moral Foundations of Capitalism lecture series at Loyola, and I always like to thank our benefactor, the BB&T Foundation, who funds the series. And as you all know, tonight our speaker is Jennifer Burns, and she's an assistant professor of history at the University of Virginia. She's a graduate of Harvard, and her PhD was at University of California at Berkeley. And this was her dissertation right there. It won the Dissertation of the Year Award in the History Department at UC Berkeley. And she teaches courses at UVA on American political, cultural, and intellectual history. This academic year, she's a visiting scholar at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And she's also a research associate at the Smithsonian Institution. So is that for this year, or as far as that goes? So she probably can get you free tickets if you want to go. She's also a Centennial Center Scholar of the American Political Science Association for 2010-11. And of course, she's the author of Goddess of the Market. And if you go to her website, you can see her appearance on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. She's been on C-SPAN's Book TV, NPR Weekend America, and other television and radio shows. And she suggested the title of Ayn Rand, Faith and Politics for her lecture tonight, and so that's what she'll be talking to us about. And we have some of her books in the back, and our bookstore is selling them, and I should be glad to autograph the book if you want to buy one after the speech. And so, Jennifer Burns.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Professor DiLorenzo, for the introduction. Let me warn you in advance, I'm recovering from a cold. I apologize in advance for any effect that has upon my lecture or my voice, and I hope you can bear with me if I cough or sniffle occasionally. Now, before I get started, I want to preemptively answer the most common question I get when I speak about my book. And this question is, how do you pronounce the name of the subject of your book? So I've learned in the course of my 8 years of research into every aspect of her life that the correct way you pronounce her name is Ayn Rand. And I say to people, the way to remember this is that, in keeping with her philosophy of rational selfishness, the correct way to pronounce her name, Ayn, rhymes with the word mine. So keep that in mind next time you stumble over the words. So, as Tom mentioned, this lecture series is on the moral foundations of capitalism. And I knew that Loyola has, as an institution, has a religious identity. So I thought I would take this lecture as an opportunity to unwind a theme in the life and thought of Ayn Rand. And this theme is the relationship of her thought to religion. Now, I want to explore this conflict between her economic ideas and religious faith. And this is one of the fundamental paradoxes of Ayn Rand, that she was an atheist, a fervent, devoted, one might even say devout atheist. Yet many of those who in her lifetime and today embrace the type of economic ideas she espoused are Christian and are religious and believe that religion should play an important role in politics and to some degree the economy. Now, Rand would say this is a terrible contradiction born out of irrational and unclear thinking. As a historian, I'm really drawn to and interested in this type of complexity and what it tells us about the larger context, how it comes out of the larger historical context of Rand and her ideas. So today I want to tease out some of these contradictions, and along the way, I want to follow an arc of history that tells us a lot about the place of religion in American politics. I think I'm getting an echo, so turn this one off. Okay. So let me begin with the basics. Who is Ayn Rand? She was born as Elisa Rosenbaum in 1905 in Petrograd, Russia. Here's a picture of her and her two sisters at a young age. As you can tell from this photograph, if you've had history professors who teach you how to think visually, she came from a fairly affluent background. You can tell by the professional photography, the hair, the bows, all of that. And she grew up, indeed, in an affluent Jewish family. But her life would change forever with the coming of the Russian Revolution. And I'm going to read you here the opening paragraph of my book to give you a sense of what that meant. It was a wintry day in 1918 when the Red Guard pounded on the door of Zinovy Rosenbaum's chemistry shop. The guards bore a seal of the state of Russia, which they nailed upon the door, signaling it had been seized in the name of the people. Zinovy could at least be thankful the mad whirl of revolution had taken only his property, not his life. But his oldest daughter, Elisa, 12 at the time, burned with indignation. The shop was her father's. He had worked for it, studied long hours at university, dispensed valued advice and medicine to his customers. Now in an instant it was gone, taken to benefit nameless, faceless peasants, strangers who could offer her father nothing in return. The soldiers had come in boots, carrying guns, making clear that resistance would mean death. Yet they had spoken the language of fairness and equality, their goal to build a better society for all. Watching, listening, absorbing, Elisa knew one thing for certain. Those who invoked such lofty ideals were not to be trusted. Talk about helping others was only a thin cover for force and power. It was a lesson she would never forget. Now, from that moment on, the life of Elisa and her family changed irrevocably. They tumbled from a comfortable life in society to a place of living in utter poverty, barely able to find their next meal, just eking out a living. And Elisa couldn't stand it. By the time she was in her early 20s, she had convinced her family that she had to get out of Russia if she were to survive. So the family wrote to relatives in Chicago, and they sponsored her for a visit to the United States that all knew would be, although the paperwork said it was temporary, everyone knew she was never coming back. Now, it's when she got there that she changed her name from Elisa Rosenbaum to Ayn Rand. And in all the research I did, I was never able to find a simple or really a single explanation for this name and why she chose it. There are multiple different explanations, and it's hard to reconcile them all. But it's worth noting that this new name, Ayn Rand, it gave no hint of her sex, her nationality, or her religion. With this new name, she created herself anew in a new land. She freed herself of the past. At least that was one of the goals of the change. Now, the tale from there is extraordinary, but I'll fast forward. It's all in my book if you want the details. She spends a little time in Chicago, then she goes on to Hollywood. In her first day in Hollywood, she has a chance encounter with her favorite director, Cecil B. DeMille, talks DeMille into giving her a job. She meets a dashing young actor, Frank O'Connor, who she marries. They'll stay married for 50 years. And she starts writing. She writes a lot. She writes screenplays. Here's Ayn Rand in the 1930s. She writes screenplays, plays, novels, and she has her first novel, We the Living, is really a testimony of her life under Soviet communism. It tells the tale of two families, their struggles. It's very autobiographical. She wrote it, as she said, to sort of get Russia out of her system. Now, We the Living was published in the 1930s. It was really with The Fountainhead in 1943 that she achieved fame. The Fountainhead became a best-selling book, and as you may know, a movie starring some of the big stars of the day. Now, how many people here have read The Fountainhead? Okay, a good smattering. Well, there's the movie, for those of you who don't think you can make it through 800 pages. But what's interesting is that on the surface, this is the tale of an independent, heroic architect who refuses to compromise his vision. This comes through a bit in this sort of absurd Hollywood graphic, although, of course, it's been given a bit of a sexual spin here. And at first, in The Fountainhead, Howard Roark, her hero, played by Gary Cooper, his career suffers for his independence. He has trouble finding work, and over the course of this story, eventually his genius is recognized and he triumphs. So this is part of Rand's moral tale. Don't compromise. True creativity comes from within. Be true to yourself, and you will succeed. And you will succeed on the only terms that matter, the terms that you set for yourself. So this is really one of the most powerful moral visions of the Fountainhead, and one that continues to attract people today. But it's not all that's going on in the novel. What those of you who have read the book or seen the movie might not know or might not appreciate is that it also was a book that made her into an icon of the political right. And I really came to appreciate this dimension of the Fountainhead while researching my book. I'm one of the first authors given full and unrestricted access to Rand's personal papers, so her letters, her diaries, early drafts of work, calendars, everything. And I've used these to excavate the hidden dimensions of her thought and to flesh out her impact she had as a historical figure and on the people she lived with and knew. And one episode I cover in detail is her 1940 work for the Wendell Willkie presidential campaign. Now, she joined this campaign in 1940. She was in the middle of writing The Fountainhead. She stopped working on the novel and went to work for Willkie because she was so opposed to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. She thought nothing was more important in the world, including her novel, than working to stop him being reelected. The New Deal was a series of reforms, regulations, federal government initiatives responding to the crisis of the Great Depression. Now, Rand considered all of this a danger to capitalism. She was pro-capitalist. She identified with the small business owner. And when she looked at the New Deal, she thought it would damage capitalism beyond repair. And when she looked at the New Deal, she flashed back to that moment when her father's livelihood was seized by the state in the name of doing good. So every expansion of the federal government in the United States reminded her of Soviet communism. And she thought, as someone who had lived in Russia, someone who hadn't been convinced by the propaganda of the time period, that she had a unique and important message. And that's what The Fountainhead was meant to be, a message about the importance of the creative individual as opposed to the collective. So in my book, I argue that The Fountainhead is not just an exciting story, it's also a deeply political work. And I show its very important impact and influence on a small circle of thinkers and activists who were beginning to form a movement against the New Deal. The Fountainhead really helped shape in fundamental ways the movement against the New Deal and the very beginnings of the modern political right in this country. But there's another key aspect of the book that goes beyond Rand's politics, and this is her atheism. Now, Rand was an atheist, she claimed, pretty much since age 12, when she just decided religion wasn't for her. She didn't believe in God. And this atheism is fundamental to her thought, and it's fundamental as well to The Fountainhead and to all her fiction. In America, she mulled over the experience of communism. She thought about what it meant. She decided it wasn't just communism. That was just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger problem that really affected sort of the greater West as a whole. She began to examine ethics and morality, think about how they fit together, and she decided that religion was a key part of the problem, because religion taught people an ethics of selflessness, an ethics of sacrifice that could be co-opted into political systems like communism. So therefore, if you were to effectively oppose communism, you would have to effectively oppose the morals that lay at the base of it. And these were religious morals, as she well understood. She wrote in some of her early diaries, quote, "I want to be known as the greatest champion of reason and the greatest enemy of religion." And as she was working on The Fountainhead, she wrote to herself, "Christianity is the best kindergarten of communism possible." So she saw The Fountainhead as promoting a new set of values. In addition to promoting capitalism, in addition to promoting individualism, it was the beginning of a new set of values of rational selfishness that would undergird and support capitalism rather than undermining it from within.